Steve Rode and Damon Day are coming at you fast, getting you out of debt with their true romance. Steve's the yin to Damon's yang, and they are here to save the day. A couple debt superheroes, Steve and Damon coming your way.
Welcome to the Debt Free Dudes podcast with Damon Day. If you want someone to blame for this podcast, track down Damon through his website, DamonDay.com. Damon is an exceptional debt coach, advisor, and a trusted resource that helps save good people from bad debt.
Hey, you're back with another Debt Free Dudes Unfiltered podcast with Damon Day and myself, Steve Rode. We're here to, Damon, how did you put it recently? You said, oh yeah, demystifying debt relief bullshit since 1994.
Something like that. You got to record me. I don't remember.
Yeah. Well, I think that's pretty close to what you said. And that is absolutely what we do. Try to give people the honest and unfiltered advice about how to really deal with debt. And Damon, today, I want to talk about a topic that has a lot of people very confused because they only read the headline when they were sitting in the bathroom scrolling through their phone. And the headline was, Navient forgives massive student loan debt. But there's more to that, isn't there?
Oh, a truckload more.
A truckload. Well, you didn't even catch on the fact that I said that you were surfing it in the bathroom and there was massive debt.
Isn't that a farmer's commercial or something? There's a whole lot more to farmers or something, a truckload more or something like that.
Well, the announcement that came out about Navient forgiving student loan debt, the devil's in the details on this thing, and most people missed the details and only went for the headline. For example, this cracks me up. So while this Navient, I'm doing air quotes here, student loan forgiveness encompasses federal student loans, you only get $260 back, but only if you live in one of 39 states. And that's the kind of detail that's going to catch a lot of people up. Have you talked to people that think their federal loans are going to be forgiven here?
I've talked to people that think everything's getting forgiven. I mean, that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this call today, because it's just, I'm, bombarded, clients, non-clients, potential clients, just nobody knows what the hell is going on. Like you said, they're reading the headlines and everybody thinks there's this massive lawsuit. Navient's, forgiving everybody's debt, and everybody is confused. In fact, not only are consumers confused, Navient is confused as all get out right now too. They have no idea what's going on. They're trying to figure it out at the same time, which is just adding to the dumpster fire.
Well, this is a key point that everyone needs to know, which is there was a resolution to this lawsuit. It did focus primarily on private student loans. However, in talking to people behind the scenes about who gets forgiveness, it came out that essentially Navient was going to write the rules on that. There was this headline, $1.7 billion, but Navient essentially gets to pick and choose which loans are forgiven. Your experience is that I don't think that you've had anybody that's had all their loans forgiven, right? It's generally one or two and they still owe money.
Yeah, I haven't seen that yet where they just all across the board. Now, I have seen several situations where the Navient rep thought they were getting all the loans forgiven, and then the client got really excited and then later found out, oops, my bad. It was only one loan, or two loans. Or I have one client that she called Navient and was told all of her loans were forgiven. She was very excited.
Yeah, I bet.
And then, I don't know, about a week later, she was told only some of the loans were forgiven, but we don't know how much yet. And then about a week after that, she was getting calls from debt collectors trying to collect on Navient loans. So you can imagine the confusion as this is all playing out. And then about a week after that, she got one of the famous, they call it a postcard, but it's a letter. I don't know why they keep calling it a postcard you're going to get in the mail.
Yeah.
And the postcard/letter outlined her debts that were forgiven. And I mean, she owed about 150, 160,000. She had 10 or 11 different loans, something like that. Maybe it was more. It was a lot of loans. And so the letter outlined the way these letters look is at the top, they'll tell you, here's your loans that are going to get forgiven. And then at the bottom, it says, here's all the crap you still owe us.
Yeah, right.
Here's all the loans that you're so responsible for. And so she went from being told and thinking that she was done paying on these private loans to she gets this letter and it forgave one loan for $1,900.
Yeah.
And she still owed the balance of the 150 some odd grand. So, I mean, talk about a high to a low in the span of like less than a month. But, because Navient's trying to figure all this out too, because, and you mentioned this earlier, but the first thing I want to clear up, because, I'm in so many student loan groups and forums and just, it hurts my head because there's just the level of misinformation, confusion, bad advice, from people on, well-to-dos on Facebook trying to help people, but oftentimes have no clue what the hell they're talking about because maybe they did something and something worked for them. So now they just project that to everybody's situation. But I see so much confusion going on, and I want to just clear up the biggest thing right now. And you mentioned it. There's a difference between federal loans and private loans. There's a lot of confusion where people think, well, if Navient has my loan, it's federal because it's Navient or it's Sally Mae. Or you have to first understand if your loans are federal or if your loans are private. If your loans are federal, the best you could possibly hope for with this lawsuit is maybe a check for $260. So
Yeah.
take that to the bank. Don't spend it all in one place. That's all you're getting. And the irony of this whole thing is this whole big lawsuit thing happened with all these attorney generals, 4 years ago. It started because Navient was accused of, needlessly putting people into forbearances rather than explaining to them, the potential benefits of an IBR or a repay or something like that. And so that was how this whole thing started, was this, attorney generals going after Navient for, these federal student loan borrowers. And at the end of the day, the outcome is, like always, the lawyers all win and the consumers get $260. That's pretty much how it always works out. So you're not getting your loans forgiven if they're federal because of this lawsuit. You're maybe going to get a check for $260. Now, if your loans are private, now this is really important because you read all these articles and they outline the specific criteria that you have to meet and your loans will be forgiven, right? So they go over these things where they say, well, if you got a Sally Mae loan, from 2002 to anywhere from 2010, some places I've seen 2014. And if you live in one of these 39 states, and if you went to one of these specific for-profit schools, and if your loan was defaulted by, July of 2021, then you're going to get this forgiveness. But wait, there's more.
Oh, yeah.
If you meet all of those criteria, and a lot of people do, that doesn't mean you're getting your loans forgiven. That just means you might get something forgiven. That's it. That's all it means.
So the language says that this is about Navient's. I'll read it exactly. The settlement administrator's site says private loan debt relief will primarily go to borrowers who took out private subprime student loans. And I don't know how you know if your loan is subprime, through Navient's predecessor, Sally Mae, between 2002 and 2014. And then, this is the one that gets me, Damon. And then you needed to have 7 consecutive months of delinquent payments prior to June 30th, 2021. So if your loan was not subprime and you made sporadic payments, but they weren't consecutive, guess what? No forgiveness.
But, and even if you meet all of that, I want to make this clear because it's confusing for people. That just means your ticket is in the lottery bowl to maybe get picked out for forgiveness. That's all that means, is like you got yourself a ticket and you may be a winner. It doesn't mean you're going to get your loans forgiven. But I want to unpack that last point because this is like, I swear, man, I should have been a lawyer. Lawyers always win. So I'm just picturing this, the attorney generals are in there, they're battling over this thing. And they come to some kind of an agreement, right? Where it's like, okay, Navient, you have to forgive $1.7 billion. So then I'm just picturing the Navient lawyers sitting there, in the room or wherever they negotiate this stuff out, right? Obviously, virtually these days.
Well, yeah, but back up 1 second. The regulators, my personal opinion is, came to this deal because after all this litigation, they needed to look like they got a win.
Of course, everybody needs a win. And
Right.
Navient needs to look like they got a loss.
Right.
And the regulators need to look like they got a win. So what they did is they got together. They got the regulators their win. They got their Navient their win that looks like a loss.
Yep.
So I could just imagine Navient coming in, their attorneys, and saying, okay, we'll agree to forgive the 1.7 billion. That sounds good for you guys. But here's our stipulation. Only for loans that are already defaulted and charged off. So think about that.
Yeah.
Why
They weren't
would
going to get
Navient
paid.
care if they
Yeah.
have to forgive 1.7 billion? What would their motivation? Because obviously that had to be negotiated into the deal. It didn't just appear there. Somebody had to, say, hey, look, I think, this should be in the deal. And they all agreed to it. So, and I'm just for the consumers out there, why would Navient care to forgive only loans that were already defaulted? What's the motivation there?
Yeah. They were already non-performing loans.
Exactly. So look at this scenario. Navient agrees to forgive 1.7 billion, but only on loans that they probably weren't going to recover on anyway. So did Navient lose?
No, Navient got a huge win. And Damon, when I went and talked to people involved in this whole thing and said, how does Navient pick the loans that are forgiven? The regulators that I talked to said, you got to ask Navient. I don't know.
It's kind of like asking Navient if you should be in a forbearance or not.
Mm-hmm. And that's how this whole thing started to begin with.
Yeah. So Navient gets to pick the loans that are going to get forgiven. So obviously, and again, I have no idea. I don't know how the sausage is made back there. But if I'm Navient and I have to forgive up to 1.7 billion, I'm going to try my best to choose loans to forgive that I was likely never going to collect on anyway, or only going to collect on a small percentage because they were already written off, charged off, no payments made for a year or two. So that's what I said. This was a big win for Navient that looked like a loss, and everybody's getting fired up thinking all their loans are going to get forgiven. And it's hard to pin down these numbers, but when you talk about 66,000 borrowers getting some forgiveness, it's not total forgiveness in most cases, it's some forgiveness, and 1.7 billion. I've seen the numbers anywhere from that 1.7 billion is less than 2%. And I've seen it even lower than that. Exactly. It's like a drop in the bucket. It's not like, half of Navient's loans are all getting forgiven or anything. So for anybody listening to this podcast, if you get all your loans forgiven, it would be absolutely the exception, not the rule. Most people that hear this aren't going to have any of their loans forgiven, and some people are going to have some of their loans forgiven. But for the most part, it's business as usual.
Yeah, I mean, one of the traps here is that you had private student loans, you were struggling along, and you made at least the minimum payment because you didn't want to default on them. You don't get forgiveness, right? Correct. You had to default in order to get forgiveness, but people didn't want to do that. What is Navient going to think of me? Well, I don't know what they're going to think now because people at Navient don't even really know how this whole thing's playing out. I mean, Damon, you've talked to people, and basically it's on a day-by-day basis almost. Yeah, let us look at the list and see what the list says today.
Yeah, and it's just nuts. But, I wanted to get this podcast out there because it's just so much confusion. People have no clue. They think they're getting forgiven. They're not getting forgiven. And honestly, I needed a break from the Facebook forums because I just, it's like I see somebody ask a question and I want to answer it honestly and help. And then a lot of times I just don't even write anything because I know the right answer is not going to be the popular answer in the forum. And I'm just going to get eviscerated. So I just be like, well, sucks for that single mom that's just going to get, ripped a new one in the forums. And, I wish I had her contact information. I could actually set her straight privately without getting ripped.
Well, there's nothing really that you can do. I mean, a consumer really can't call up and demand a Navient, I want my private student loans forgiven, because as it says in the settlement agreement, that Navient will send you a letter by July 2022 if any of your loans are forgiven. And if you haven't received a letter yet, either it's coming by this summer or you don't get one.
Yeah, and the letters started kind of going out in April. I've seen a few of them, so they're starting to trickle in. A lot of people that are going to receive one should be receiving them, the first half of May, like right now. You should be getting it. And then what you do is just look and see the loans on the top, it explains those are the ones that we're going to forgive, and the ones at the bottom you're still responsible for. And it is what it is. There's no appeal. There's no questioning. There's no, I'd like a reconsideration. It's just, if you get some loans forgiven, you say thank you, and then you still continue to deal with the rest of them. And if you don't ever get a notification or a loan forgiven, you just keep moving forward as you're moving forward, and deal with the loans as you can.
Well, one of the positive things about this settlement, forcing Navient to do their job, the settlement also requires Navient to notify borrowers about the U.S. Department of Education's recently announced public service loan forgiveness limited waiver opportunity. So that's only about federal loans and people who are only in public service. But there is a window right now to get credit for payments you may or may not have paid towards public student loan forgiveness. What you can do is go to getoutofdebt.org. That's my site, and look for a post that says Navient enters massive student loan forgiveness settlement. And that has all the details in here to show you how ridiculous this whole thing is. And I hate making anyone think that they're a victim or entitled to anything. But Damon, you ran into let's call it a hypothetical situation where somebody hypothetically settled their Navient private student loans and then had one or more of their private loans forgiven. And even Navient can't tell how much should be credited where because there's no guidance.
Yeah, there's not. Navient's kind of having to make it up as they go along, because essentially they've got, handed this thing that says you must forgive, 1.7 billion worth of loans that meet this criteria. So there was no instruction manual for how to do that. So they're just kind of doing it as they see fit. So yeah, it's very confusing. And it's not, the rep's fault. They're just trying to relay, the reps at Navient, they're just trying to relay information as they're getting it. And a lot of that instruction for them is changing by the day.
Yeah.
Or one day they're told, like I had a couple rep that felt really bad when they called me and said, hey, look, this client that you have, her loans all got pulled. All of her loans are forgiven. This is a different hypothetical story. But I remember when I was talking to the rep, I said, are you sure? Because this was like 2.5 months ago. This was when this whole thing was still fairly new. It just come out. And the rep said, yes, all our loans got pulled from our office. So that means they were forgiven. They were tagged with the AG, sign or whatever they have, designation in their books. So that means they were all forgiven. And I didn't call the client right away because I didn't get the vote of confidence from the rep. And, the last thing I want to do is call the client and say, guess what? Merry Christmas, $250,000 is now, forgiven, and you don't have to worry about that anymore. And now we can focus on your $200,000 in federal loans, unfortunately for that client. But I was just like, you know what? I'm going to sit on it a couple of days and just see, because this is all breaking, right? Well, a few days later, I get a call back and it said, Damon, I'm sorry. Don't say anything to your client. I need to verify something first. And I was like, okay.
Mm-hmm.
A week later, I get another call. I'm really sorry. It's really confusing. None of the loans were forgiven.
No.
And I go, okay. And look, I'd never said anything to the client at that point, obviously, because it wouldn't make a difference either way, whether she knew a week ahead of time or not. So now that's just part of it. So then I'm thinking, okay, there's this whole roller coaster. A couple days later, I get a call back. We were wrong again. Those loans are forgiven 100%. We've got it figured out. It's gone back and forth. And this was this was like over 200 grand in private loans.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, you're sure? Because this has been going on like 2 weeks now. And I'm like, I haven't said anything to the client. You're sure? If I call the client and I tell her that her loans because this was a situation, she was a single mom, she didn't make a lot of money. It would have been a huge, huge blessing to get these loans forgiven. And so, we went back and forth. Yes, absolutely. These are forgiven. It's done. I said, okay, I'm going to tell my client, because I told the rep the story that I hadn't told my client yet this whole time, because I didn't want my client on this emotional roller coaster if it didn't turn out to be true. So the rep's like, 100%, they are forgiven. Check with the supervisor. You're good to go. Call the client. She's super stoked. Everything's awesome. About 3 weeks later, she calls me up. I got a collection letter from a collector, not from Navient, from a debt collector, talking about what she owes on Navient loans. And I'm like, you got to be fucking kidding me. You know what I mean? And I don't understand how people can get confused here, you know? And I know people at Navient, so I get the straight story. I can call them up and ask them, like, what the hell? So I called the rep and I'm like, what is going on? And she goes, well, now it's with the different department. She goes, best I can tell is maybe only some of her loans got forgiven and the other ones got sent out to a collector. And I'm like, okay, I can understand that. But then why would they send them out to a collector? We're already on a payment plan. You've been on a payment plan for years with these loans, an affordable plan for the client. And so now I'm in the middle of the saga of getting the loans that weren't forgiven back from the collector, back to Navient, back to the other department that they need to be in, so I can get her back on an affordable payment plan for the remaining loans. So the whole thing is a cluster. That's what it is right now.
Well, the official website for the Navient settlement is actually navientagsettlement.com. navientagsettlement.com. And if you go to that site, it is light on information, but just the headline of that site says, as of April 22nd, 2022, postcard notices were sent to eligible borrowers. You may update your address and or select a payment option by selecting blah, blah, blah. So, but here's the thing. This is all about geared towards private student loan forgiveness. It looks like a postcard's going to be sent, but yet you got to read the fine print, because what it says is on April 22, 2022, the settlement administrator sent a postcard to each federal loan borrower, only federal loan borrowers, eligible to receive a restitution payment. So, people don't have information yet about all of their, or the lack of, private loans will be forgiven. This official site, navientagsettlement.com, provides really no clarifying information. It's got a little FAQ section on the bottom of it, but I think it only adds to the complexity and frustration of this situation. Damon, this is why I think it's so important that people contact you. And I mean, because it's like being lost at sea, right? I mean, you can flounder around at sea all you want, but you need a little guidance to get pointed in the right direction. And more specifically, and this is where the Facebook forums will screw you up. They will make you think you've been a victim, you've been screwed over, you're not getting the right thing, you should demand this or that. But a lot of that information is just wrong. So you need a guide to tell you what reality is and what the rules are, just to improve the quality of your life. I mean, stop being angry and everything all the time. Just know what reality is, and talking to Damon will do that for you.
Well, you could be lost at sea, and if you ask for help on the Facebook forum, someone's going to come in there and say, you don't need help. You can find your way to land for free. Just look at the stars, man.
That's right.
You could do it for free. You don't need any help.
That ship going by is going to charge you to save you.
Yeah.
Wave them on. Wave them on.
Just look at the stars. They'll point the way. No. And I want to reiterate again, because I know Navient gets a bad rap all the time. And, a lot of people listening to this might, will end up on the phone with maybe a Navient representative. And at least the ones that I talk to, I mean, they're good people. They're really trying to help. They're doing the best they can with the information they have. And I know sometimes it turns into a cluster, especially something like this where it's developing. But the reps that I deal with, they're really trying to help people the best they can. That's not to say every single rep you talk to, and depends on the department, but the worst thing you can do is call up and start yelling at them, or getting frustrated with them.
That's
because
stupid.
In my experience, they're just taking the information that they've been given and they're relaying that. And I know the rep, in that fiasco that I mentioned, she felt so bad, but it wasn't her fault. I mean, she was giving me the data and the information that she had at the time. And it was just such a new thing. It was going back and forth. And I mean, we're going to get it all worked out. It's fine. It's just unfortunate that the client thought they had them all forgiven and it ended up only being some. But at the end of the day, most of her loans were forgiven. So, even though she still owes some, she doesn't owe over 200,000 anymore. So it's still a good thing.
Damon, I'm glad we talked about this topic. We are out of time, but if you have any questions about this, you can either visit Damon, DAMONDAY.com, and try to hit Damon up to get some of his good advice, or visit my site where I write about these topics every day, getoutofdebt.org. My name's Steve Rode, and Who are you, Damon?
I am Damon Day.
There you go.
My son says I'm damonday.com.
Yes, you are.